I'm gonna come over here so I'm talking to you rather than kind of wandering around like an area.
I mean, first of all, congratulate yourself on getting tenure. I think one of the things that as academics we have a tendency to do is look at accomplishments and then look for the next one. You really should enjoy it. It's an accomplishment, a considerable one, and you worked hard for it. So, Winnie the Pooh notwithstanding, I think it's important that you really enjoy what you've done. Now, this is going to be like a film strip.
It's the lower button.
Okay. So, what do you do when you come? First of all, remember that the rules are different. The rules for tenure are very prescriptive, either in your department, your college, or even at the university. And we just spent a year sort of coming up with new rules for tenure. That isn't, if you read the paragraph, or 2 paragraphs on the definition of promotion of full, it's very, very vague. That's on purpose. So you're going to be able to select a route that's going to be more unique to you, less anyone else. So evaluate what you learned from the tenure process, but what you like to do, what you don't like to do, what do you do well, what are your weaknesses. Don't concentrate on your weaknesses. I know colleagues love to tell you about that. I think that's a gigantic mistake. You're old enough now that we're not going to get much better in our weak areas. We will get better in our strong areas, for a whole bunch of reasons, but one of which is we like them. So I do think that if you have some serious deficits, you might want to look at those, but I change my mind every year when I put this slide up. How much accommodation do I want to make to issues that I think are my weaknesses? I don't know, but I always think issues should play to your strengths. So you've done all these exciting things, you've done your service, you've done your teaching, you've got your scholarship. Have you really fulfilled your personal aspirations? Have you really done the things that you want to do? There's a bunch of different wraps to tenure, one of which is you look at the list, you aim for it, you go over that bar. The other one is figure out what you want to do, assume that will meet the criteria and work toward that. And I think the second one is the best one. I think the second one is harder because you have to get some agreement from people who may not want to be quite that flexible. But on the other hand, it might work out just fine. Okay, so again, the criteria for full are vague. So I think there are a lot of paths for you personally, not just everybody, but you personally to be promoted to full. Okay. One of the things that is tempting is we get used to the pattern that we were in to get tenure. Go, go, go. It's okay, I'm in this area right now, it's productive, I'm getting good kudos from colleagues. So what, I'm not that excited about it, it's working for me. You don't have to do that. You really don't. You can look at your career and decide what works for you, and you've got time. And one of the great things about it is, it's flexible too, the amount of time you have to get promoted. So if you want to do different things and you figure it's going to take you an extra 2 years to get there, that's okay. And I'll show you the data that shows it doesn't really matter in terms of time. I'll show you how it all sort of stacks up university-wide. The other thing is that while I worked really hard when my kids were young to spend time with them, you kind of have to make sure that you don't forget your family because they're the ones who kept you here. They're the ones who kept you sane through the whole process. And I couldn't have done it without them, and because in some ways I didn't really do it just for me, a lot for me, but for them too. This is the one that you're used to. This is the scenario of balancing. Again, they're not of equal weight. We know that, and that's why one of them is certainly up front. But the reality is, this is the one we're used to balancing. That's not really our lives. What we have is your career, your family, and yourself. And we have a horrible tendency through this whole tenure process to ignore ourselves. We push, we give up things. Hopefully we don't give up our family, but we certainly don't give up any of those 3. And if we don't give up our family, then you've certainly probably ignored yourself. And I think it's really important to remember that. And I'm not so holistic as to believe that you can get away with going off to an ashram for a year or two. Although it might be interesting if that's what you're going to study. But I think it's important to remind yourself that this is about your life, not your career. And one thing I learned the hard way is that I could never be good at even two of these things. Well, I could be good at two of these things at a time. I was never great at more than two. And often when I went from good to great or great to excellent, something went down a level. Because you only have so much time. You only have so much of you that you can give to anything. And you lose. And your person, yourself is usually the one you give up the most, but your family can suffer too. And that was one thing that I tried to avoid, although, depending on what my wife says, I'm not sure. But, how did I get here? Well, I came here in '97. My boys were very young. In fact, when we got here, my youngest wasn't quite one. And it was exciting, kids were fun, got to do Cub Scouts and all the fun things, and I'm glad I didn't miss that. I'm glad I didn't give that up through the process. Went up for tenure in 2003. Boys were considerably older, but they still needed me. It was still a good time. They actually still liked me then. And then came the teenage years. I couldn't get a really good picture of the black hole, but it's like that, or at least it was for us. And they took up a lot of time, not necessarily in the same way they had before, but they needed me to be around. And if I weren't around, things usually went south. So after I got tenure, I got involved with Texas Governor's School. I ran that for 5 years. That was something that was never on my radar, never anything I considered doing. Opportunity came up. I asked my wife, geez, I knew what the governor's schools were from the states I grew up in. Thought this might be cool to have. It became probably the most interesting thing I've done, and probably the most gratifying because it worked. Weird, but so I did that for 5 years. Right after I started that, our chair decided to leave, and I was asked to be interim chair, which lasted 2.5 years. So clearly, in my scale of balancing, something was going to have to give. My wife used to get really mad when governor's school went on, so she went on vacation. But I don't think I neglected my family too much. I think my scholarship went down. It was certainly something I knew I was sacrificing. And then as soon as I stepped down from material science chair, I had 3 months off when the dean asked me to become E-Tech interim chair. I did that for 18 months. So quite frankly, it was very difficult to do a lot of scholarship. I managed to help edit a book, I managed to get publications out, but at a much slower rate than I had been. Teaching, fortunately, was something where I had enough momentum that I didn't have to worry about losing too much traction there. Service, of course, wasn't a problem at all. But the teenage years were complex, and this was all going on at the same time. And I made sure that I made football games and tennis matches and judo matches and other things. You see Mike there, he's some of the tennis matches. Now the kids are old and gone, and now would be a great time to take on administrative responsibilities, but I'm tired. I don't want to do that anymore. So you never really know what your career is going to turn out like. If you'd have told me half of these events would have occurred in 1997, I would have laughed and probably not stopped for a while. So what's important? Well, then I think you need to realize your time scale. You have 5 or more years. I mean, you can go up early if you want to, and great things might happen, and that's perfect, and then go for it. But at the same time, you don't have to. I do think that you need to spend time with your family. I urge you to do something I've never done, which is do faculty development leave. Everybody I know who's done it has been happy doing it. And they said it was daunting, and they said they were afraid that the world would end with them being gone. But the fact is that they were happier when they came back. I mean, I spent summers away, but I've never spent a semester off, and I should have. Expand your collaborations. Find people that are doing things that you want to do. I think in the climate, and Angela pointed this out when I showed you these slides, that we are in a climate where research is becoming a greater priority to the administration, and we can't ignore that. So we need to look for collaborations, new research areas, whatever form they take in your field. And in service, I think be selective and do things that you want to do. You kind of have enough standing that you can at least make a move in that area. But be open to things that might be different. In terms of scholarship, there are so many different ways you can do it, and this is a very, very short list. One thing that and I mentioned this, I think, at a recent workshop, one of the most terrifying things is to go into a new area of research and give your first talk in it, because you're 100% sure that the audience knows more about it than you do, and you're afraid that you're going to say something wrong and they're going to nail you for it. It's like almost giving your first oral defense in your doctoral area. But the fact is, you should do it anyway. You should get used to taking those chances, because you got hired here because you have skills to open up new areas, not just to do something that someone else has already done. And now that you have the benefit of having tenure, you should use that. If your area isn't to get, or the big thing in your field is not necessarily to go beat down doors and get tons of money, look for workshops. Look for bringing attention to UNT. Look for things that you do, and you know people who do things that you can bring to UNT and bring some notoriety here. Change the gravitational forces of your field. You have that, and the research office, I'm sure, will support that. Again, creating infrastructure that makes your department or your life better. A lot of things are wrong with this place. Great to complain about it. Unfortunately, we all complain about almost the same things. Occasionally, we can just fix a couple of them, and life will be better. Again, I keep putting faculty development. Do not ignore that. Again, editorships, they suck time, but they also improve your visibility. Having high visibility means that people will talk to you that maybe not normally would, or would know your name who wouldn't normally. These are huge assets. Again, the summer programs. Administrative assignments. I took 3. All different. I learned a lot about me. Learned a lot of different things. And learning how this place works. I'm not saying you'll go over to the dark side, but the fact is that understanding what administrators do is helpful, because then you can be more constructive instead of, at least in my case, I can be more constructive. But take chances. And it's okay to. During the tenure process, you're discouraged from doing that for good reason, because if you really flub, and for example, I did, it takes everything you got to get back in the game. But now, it isn't required. Things that you have to watch out for. Oh my gosh, they're gonna dump service on you. They are going to. Pick things you like, because if you like them, they'll take less time, because you'll be good at them. Don't give in to the fact that you can chair 3 or 4 committees. It's not fair. And quite frankly, studies nationwide show that women fall greater victim to this than men. And men let it happen, because they don't want it. And the reality is that we should all share the burden of whatever service is going on. When you decide you want to go up for promotion, don't let anyone other than either your chair or your dean talk to you about how I'm going up for it. I can give you the slides.
Oh, really? Okay.
Yeah, sure.
Thank you. We're recording it too.
Yeah.
Oh, great.
Yeah, and if you get the slides, you don't have to listen to me.
That's all friends.
But yeah, don't let anybody other than your chair and your dean talk you out of it. They're the only ones who have a way of sort of slowing you up. There are way too many people who, through no malice, just assess you differently than you might. One of the great realities I think all of us know is that I don't think any of us are regarded as well as people in here, as well as people regard us outside of here. I didn't say that very well, but the fact is that our notoriety outside of this zip code is usually a lot higher than it is within it. And so someone critiquing you or thinking you're not quite ready may very well not have a clue of how good you actually are. I think that there isn't really a go, no-go in promotion. I think there's a point in which you might make a choice where you're not going to push to be what they generally think of as excellent in 2 of the 3 categories. But I think if you work hard in 2 of those 3 and are decent in the 3rd, I don't think anything will hold you back. So don't let anyone talk you out of it. Don't lose scholarship focus. It's too easy when service is dumped on you. I mean, I tried not to. I probably lost more momentum than I ever wanted to. But the reality is that stay focused. Know what you want to do, and fight to maintain that part of your time. Because if people dump service on you and you continue to try to do the research and the teaching that you want to, then you're going to take it away from yourself and your family, and that's wrong. You should be protecting that at this point in your career. Don't give in to the frenetic pace you work during tenure. You can still do really good work and not be insane. Okay, when? Here are the colleges. This is 3 years ago. I took as much data on campus as I could find and figured out how long it took people to get promoted. I was very specific about the data set. They had to start as assistant professors at UNT until promotion. So all these time, anyone who came here as an assistant, but from somewhere else after 2 years, I threw their data out. Nothing against them, but I just couldn't figure, I wanted to know how UNT treats its own. And so this is, I update it every year, but I have a whole bunch of graphs, and I didn't update this one, so this is a couple years out of date, but it's not horrible. It's off by maybe a couple decimal points, but not a lot more than that. The UNT average right now is that a couple years ago it was flat, and women were getting promoted roughly, really close to roughly exactly the same amount of time. Now it's slightly different. You might think that bad. It's actually good, because what is happening is that women who have been in associate professors for 10 years or more are finally getting promoted. So while it might seem like it's longer, they're finally getting their due. So this just gives you an idea. The ballpark at UNT is, close to 8 years. Again, you'll see the histogram in a second. How do we compare nationally? We're not bad. I think the women were slightly better than average. For men, we're slightly longer than average, but we're not bad. This is just 1 year. What you notice here is that you see an upswing and a down and an upswing. That actually plays out in the real data. I'll show you the whole cumulative data set. But you see people with a range. People go on 5 years or less. A lot of people going up at 4. 3 is extremely rare. I think 1 or 2 ever. But 4 is getting somewhat common. I know the new rules say 5. I don't know how hard people are holding to that. I know in my college they're not. So we had someone holding up at 4 this year. Again, how long are people staying in position? This is, as best as I know it, all the people who started at UNT, who got promoted, this is the data set. Looking at, we have about 38 people who are 5 years or less. The peak sits at about 6. But as you can tell, between sort of 5 and, actually, 4 is not small. I didn't put that in here, but so I'm just going to run out of room. But, between 5 and 7 is common. But don't give up, because the fact is that if you don't feel you're ready, there is no slight against that. We were promoting people, again, well over 15 years. So how do you know if you're ready? I don't know. This is a hard one. I think talking to your chair, you're going to need their support. Don't ignore the fact that you're going to need their support. I think you should talk to your dean. Do not email them. You really do not email. You want the nuances of their response. You want to look at them, because they can write all sorts of things. They could be tired. They could be just thinking, yeah, but I'm a little worried about this. You want to look them in the eye, have the conversation, ask them the secondary questions, because you don't want to go up and fight a dean, even if you win. It's a fight. It's annoying. It's tiring. It's not worth your time. On the other hand, if they have some misgivings, maybe you can just explain yourself a little bit better, and then they'll be fine with it. This is the one thing you can't do when you go for tenure, but you can do when you go for promotion. you can talk to the people who are going to evaluate you. There's no rule that says you can't. I mean, I think there's money under the table might be a problem, but I mean, other than that, I think it's quite legitimate. I think one test that might be good is, do you think you can get the 5 people from schools that are better, as good as we are or better, with the appropriate stature in your field to write decent letters? You don't get the full set of letters, I know you know that, but if you can think of at least 5, then I think you have a reasonable chance. These aren't people that you grew up with or something like that. So, good luck, have fun.
Are we allowed to ask questions?
Of course.
You mentioned something about like trying to stay away from being dumped a lot of services after tenure. So, I mean, can you provide more details of how you evaluate when it's too much, and how do you, I mean, kind of negotiate that tactically?
Tactically?
Tactically, yeah.
Okay, tactfully, you're gonna learn to need to say no. I'm horrible at it, by the way, you can tell. I had a colleague, he's since left unfortunately, but his wife used to ask him when he came home, how many times did you say no to someone today? Because he's a reasonably high profile person, and people had a tendency to ask him to do a lot of things. The reality is that you can't do too many things. People will literally change your world on you, on committees. I mean, I remember shortly after tenure, I went crazy and started doing a bunch of stuff, and I thought, I haven't even edited my student's dissertation this week because I was doing service the whole week. I thought, this is wrong. And, you know, I got invitations from the provost to do something, or the dean to do something. You know, at what point do you say no? You say no when you can't do the other things that you want to do. And most importantly, if it starts to affect your home life or your time with your family, then it's absolutely no. I mean, you're not gonna not get promoted if you don't do it, if you don't do awesome service. If you do very good service, you're fine.
Like some people just tell me that, oh, you're expected to do more service after you get tenure.
How much are they doing? I know, I mean, that was rhetorical. I mean, the thing is that the reality is that we should never be tapering off service. Okay, this isn't a hazing ritual as an associate professor that you get dumped a whole bunch of credit to, and then when you get to promote to be full, you don't have to do it anymore. You should be doing the same amount of service all the way through. So what full...
When you were an assistant?
No, I'm talking about post-tenure. No, I'm sorry. Yes. Post-tenure, you should get to the level where the full professors are. Maybe not instantly, but within a year. But if the full professors are thinking they can dump it on you, that's incredibly unfair. And I would talk to my chair about it. And if you really don't like it, there's other ways. Can you do it tactfully? Sometimes no. But I would say most of the time you can. But I think pick things that you like. You know, and the easiest way to do what I thought about doing, and I did it once or twice, is when I finally got a lull in service, is I went out and found particular committees I wanted to be on, and they protected me because then I wouldn't have to do other things. Or, hey, come on, already on this stuff, I can't do it anymore. But they were things I liked. I'm sorry, Angela, you had...
And that's a great strategy, because I mean, like as soon as I became associate professor, the faculty senate came calling in terms of, would you be on this committee? And it was a committee that frankly, I had absolutely no interest in being a part of. And so I said, you know what? I said, because I was doing a lot of service in the department. And I said, you know what? How about if an opening comes up on this and this committee, the research committee, which is something I'm passionate about. I said, if an opening comes up on that, then count me in, but I would have to take a pass on this one. And they said, that's fine. And so the moment that an opening came up on the research committee, I was on the research committee. And so, there's certainly tactful ways you can do it. And in terms of determining when when your service load gets to be too much, if you can't keep up a similar pace in terms of publications, or if your area you're publishing, so if you can't keep up with what you were doing as an assistant professor, or being able to go to like the bigger projects like Rick was talking about, then that's when you need to scale back a little bit. And some of the service you may be thinking more about, which will help you out in terms of your external letters, in so many other ways, is trying to do a little bit more external service.
Right.
So, professional society service and all that. That can become really critical with your associate professors.
It's kind of hard to balance that because your department definitely expects a lot out of you when you're doing service. So when you're also doing the external ones together, combined, it's a lot to take.
It is.
That's why I asked whether there's a technical way of kind of figuring things out instead of like just saying no.
Well,
People will think you're not collegial or you're not like.
But you're never gonna, I mean, there are some people who are incredibly non-collegial in this place, and they still got promoted, okay? So that's not, I'm not gonna pull any punches.
Not recommended.
I'm not gonna say who it is, okay? It doesn't matter. The fact that I don't recommend it, yes, but I think, remember two parts of this equation. Those external letters, as Angela is saying, are very important. They're going to turn the tide if you're even close. If you're close, they're the things that'll save you. So doing external stuff that give you the visibility, that's going to save you. Because if you do some awesome committee here, people will forget about it. Institutional memory here, what do you say, 2-3 years? Which is shorter than your time. So the cool things you're doing in the first couple of years won't be remembered very well by the time you get up for promotion. So keep it, that's another twisted thing, but it's true. If you do really cool work, it can be easily forgotten. And so, whereas external stuff has a tendency to hang around, because you meet people, you increase your visibility. So no, I 100% agree with Angela. I think, I didn't say it well enough. I think you should do as much external as you feel comfortable and as many doors as you feel it's opening for you. There are limits, of course, but.
It's a big deal.
Sure. Can you share your slide results with us?
Sure. Just email me. I'll send them.
So I'm Victor Prybutok, and I'm a Regents professor in the College of Business. I'm also an associate dean in the College of Business, and prior to that I was an associate dean in the grad school, and prior to that I was a doctoral program director in the College of Business, and for 30 years I ran a Center for Quality and Productivity as well. And I mention that because we're talking about service. There we go. Okay. So I think I agree with almost everything Rick said. There's always one thing I disagree with, the sabbatical. I took one. I'm the only person he knows who says he wasn't happy. I don't know, it's more work for me than being here, so I don't know what that says about me, but something I'm sure. The key here is that, promotion isn't automatic, and you need to do something slightly different in order to get promoted, because if all you do is duplicate what you did to get to tenure, in some places that may suffice, but generally it falls short. Because what you're looking for is a level of national recognition and gaining respect both internally and externally that isn't easily available by fulfilling, I hate to call it a check sheet, but all the requirements. And so if that's all you've done again, then the question is, why should you be promoted? And I think people, as Rick said, fall in this habit of, I was successful doing this, I'm going to continue doing this. So you have to have, of course, the usual things, the strong publication record, but somehow you have to figure out how to gain a competitive edge in all of this. And you're going to publish articles, you're going to do grants, you're going to do conferences. I won't, external visibility, I think it is critical. I know people here who almost never go to a conference, but they're passing up an opportunity to meet their colleagues across the country, to interact with them, to gain respect, and to ultimately gain the opportunity to both do service at the national level or the regional level if it's valuable to you, but also editors show up at these conferences. I learned a lot of lessons about publication the hard way, and I have a fair number of publications, about 160 plus referee journal articles and 200 and some conference articles, presentations on the conferences. I no longer put proceedings in because of authenticating nonsense related to overlap, so I don't bother. So the question is, you know, going back to this conference presentation, I did a presentation at what used to be called ORSA, Operations Research Society of America, is now called Informs, and that presentation was attended by one of the editors of a major journal, Operations Research, and he said, you know, I sent you a letter a few months back asking for an article, and you didn't respond. And I thought, I can tell you what actually happened. My co-author and I looked at the letter and thought our work wasn't good enough and threw it in the trash. And so I said, well, you'll have it within the month. And within a few months, we were in a journal that's on the Financial Times 45 and every College of Business premier list. So would it have happened if I hadn't gone to a conference? No. And I meet editors all the time, and I owe them effort in terms of reviewing papers and other things that I fulfill, and they remember that, and it works to your advantage. It doesn't mean that it makes it easier, but it does work to your advantage. This group you see here, I said increase your quality and quantity by increasing your outreach and collaboration, both externally and internally. So every Friday, I meet with my doctoral students as well as some faculty. I have a visiting scholar from China, there's a new faculty member that just joined our faculty, he came here from via France, he's Korean, but he was at the University of France. And what we do is we go around and talk about our current research projects, what our targets are, what we're going to do. This is not something you can do as an assistant prof. This is something you can develop into, but you don't, I mean, as assistant prof, you trade labor for learning, and so, you know, I was able to work at a pace of 2 articles a year in terms of publication rate. And now I'm averaging over 5 a year for over 30 years, so clearly I do more now. One of the reasons for that is more people will reach out to collaborate with me. Now, to be fair, I also had to get articles in hard copy, and I had to request through interlibrary loan, and sometimes wait a month, and I was a person before their time using a daisy wheel printer and a mainframe. So it's easier to do things today, and some people don't recognize that. You can sit at home and you can do a lit review in a relatively short time, and get pretty close to where you've got control of whether the topic's been done before, what you've got is unique, and how you could position it. And that is much easier today. The rest of the work, you know, there's more people competing for the select few outlets, I understand that. So, basically I'm telling you pretty much do everything, but I'm gonna put a caveat on that. And that is, when Rick says, do what you like, do what you enjoy, I'm really kind of very skillful at the following, and it's a lesson for you. If there is something that is well rewarded, but I like to do something that is marginally different, then I look at